Welcome back to Veil of Time, where we uncover the hidden stories of history that shape our present and future. Here we journey beyond the surface and into the heart of history, because only when we look beyond the veil can we truly understand the world we live in today. Sudan, one of Africa's largest and most geopolitically complex nations, rich in culture, history, and resources, yet torn apart by decades of conflict, colonial exploitation, and political turmoil. From the ancient Nubian kingdoms to the long struggle for independence, through civil wars and modern revolutions, Sudan's story is one of resilience, tragedy, and hope. But this is more than just a history lesson. It's a tale of a people who have weathered immense challenges, only to stand tall once more. So let's dive in as we explore the past, present, and future of Sudan. Ancient civilizations of Sudan, Nubia and Kush. Long before the arrival of European colonizers, Sudan was home to one of the world's most remarkable ancient civilizations, Nubia. Imagine towering pyramids rising from the desert sands, testaments to the power of the Nubian kingdoms, which thrived along the Nile. One of Nubia's most powerful kingdoms, Kush, not only coexisted with Egypt, but eventually conquered it, ruling as the 25th dynasty of the Egyptian pharaohs in the 8th century BCE. Their reign over Egypt may have ended by the 7th century BCE, but the kingdom of Kush endured, trading gold and ivory and leaving behind architectural marvels that still stand today, the pyramids of Meroe. This rich cultural heritage forms the foundation of Sudan's identity, a legacy not forgotten by its people, but celebrated in the sands of its deserts. The arrival of Islam and the Funj Sultanate. As the centuries passed, Sudan found itself at the crossroads of cultures and religions. By the 7th century, Arab traders and missionaries brought Islam across the Red Sea, and the religion soon took root in northern and central Sudan. By the 16th century, the Funj Sultanate of Sennar emerged, marking a new era. Picture a thriving kingdom where Islam flourished, trade routes connected distant lands, and Sudan became a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and traditions. The Funj Sultanate bridged the Arab world and sub-Saharan Africa, creating a diverse and dynamic society. Yet, even as the Funj prospered, Sudan's wealth and strategic location attracted foreign attention, setting the stage for the conflicts to come. Ottoman influence and the emergence of the Mahdist state. In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire sought to extend its reach into Sudan. Egyptian forces, under the control of the Ottoman Empire, invaded Sudan in 1820, driven by the desire for resources, particularly gold and slaves. The occupation was harsh, and resentment simmered among the Sudanese. This discontent gave rise to a revolutionary leader, Muhammad Ahmad, who declared himself the Mahdi, the Guided One. Leading a revolt against the Egyptian and Ottoman forces, the Mahdi's army swept across Sudan, capturing the capital Khartoum in 1885 and establishing the Mahdist state. For a brief moment, it seemed Sudan had freed itself from foreign control. But in 1898, British and Egyptian forces returned, launching a brutal campaign that culminated in the Battle of Omdurman. The Mahdist state fell, and Sudan entered the colonial era. Colonialism and the Anglo-Egyptian condominium. Sudan's colonial period began in 1899 with the establishment of the Anglo-Egyptian condominium. Though nominally ruled by both Britain and Egypt, Sudan was essentially governed by the British, who divided the country into two distinct regions, northern and southern Sudan. This divide and rule strategy would have lasting consequences for the nation. The north, with its predominantly Arab Muslim population, was favored by the British, receiving more investment and development. The south, home to a diverse array of African ethnic groups and largely Christian and animist, was neglected. This artificial division sowed the seeds of future conflict, as the two regions were developed along entirely different lines, both economically and culturally. During this period, the British sought to exploit Sudan's resources, particularly its cotton production, which was critical to the British textile industry. The construction of infrastructure, like railways and irrigation systems, was primarily geared towards serving colonial economic interests rather than benefiting the Sudanese people. While Sudan remained under the British-Egyptian rule for over half a century, the spirit of resistance never faded. Nationalist movements began to emerge in the early 20th century, particularly in the north, where intellectuals and elites called for independence. It was the convergence of these nationalist sentiments and growing regional tensions that would eventually lead to Sudan's struggle for independence. The Road to Independence, 1956. By the mid-20th century, the winds of change were sweeping across Africa. Sudan, like many other colonized nations, sought freedom from European rule. The movement for independence gained momentum in the 1940s, with political parties such as the Umma Party and the Sudanese Communist Party calling for self-determination. In 1956, after years of negotiation and growing unrest, Sudan finally gained its independence. Ismail al-Azhari became the country's first prime minister, and Sudan emerged as the largest country in Africa, with enormous potential for growth and development. However, independence brought with it deep-seated challenges. The British left behind a nation divided, North against South, Arabs against Africans, Muslims against Christians. The seeds of conflict had been sown during colonial rule, and they would soon erupt into one of the longest-running civil wars in African history. The First Sudanese Civil War, 1955 to 1972. Just a year before Sudan gained independence, the First Sudanese Civil War broke out, primarily between the northern government and southern rebel groups. The war was driven by political, economic, and religious differences, with the South feeling marginalized by the northern-dominated government in Khartoum. The conflict dragged on for 17 years, claiming the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and displacing millions. The war only ended in 1972 with the signing of the Addis Ababa Agreement, which granted the South a degree of autonomy. But the peace was fragile, and the underlying issues of inequality and political exclusion remained unresolved. For a brief period, Sudan experienced relative stability, but the peace was short-lived. Economic challenges, political corruption, and rising Islamic fundamentalism in the north once again pushed the country toward the brink of disaster. The rise of Omar al-Bashir and the Second Civil War, 1983 to 2005. In 1983, Sudan plunged back into civil war. President Jafar Nimeri, who had led the country since the late 1960s, imposed Sharia law across Sudan, further alienating the largely non-Muslim South. This decision reignited tensions and led to the formation of the Sudan People's Liberation Army, SPLA, led by John Garang. The Second Sudanese Civil War would last for over 2 decades, becoming one of the deadliest conflicts in modern history. The war was not only about religion and culture, but also about control over Sudan's vast natural resources, particularly oil reserves discovered in the south. In 1989, a military coup brought Omar al-Bashir to power, and he would remain president for the next 30 years, ruling Sudan with an iron fist. Bashir's regime was marked by severe human rights abuses, political repression, and an increasingly radical Islamic agenda. His government's tactics during the Civil War, which included the use of militias and aerial bombings, led to widespread atrocities in the south. Despite the brutality of the war, international efforts to mediate a peace agreement eventually bore fruit. In 2005, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, CPA, was signed, bringing an end to the Civil War and granting the South the right to hold a referendum on independence. The birth of South Sudan, 2011. In 2011, the people of southern Sudan voted overwhelmingly for independence, and on July 9th of that year, South Sudan became the world's newest nation. For many, it was a moment of triumph, the culmination of decades of struggle for self-determination. However, the birth of South Sudan did not bring peace to the region. The country was left devastated by decades of war, and tensions between the North and South continued, particularly over border disputes and oil resources. The separation also dealt a severe economic blow to Sudan, which lost a significant portion of its oil revenues with the secession of the South. Meanwhile, conflict was brewing in other parts of Sudan, particularly in the western region of Darfur, the Darfur genocide. While the world's attention was focused on the civil war between North and South, another devastating conflict erupted in the western region of Darfur in 2003. The Darfur conflict was rooted in ethnic and economic tensions between the Arab-dominated government in Khartoum and non-Arab ethnic groups in Darfur. The Sudanese government, under Omar al-Bashir, responded to a rebellion in Darfur with brutal force, enlisting Arab militias, known as the Janjaweed, to carry out a campaign of terror against the civilian population. What followed was one of the most horrific genocides of the 21st century. An estimated 300,000 people were killed, and millions more were displaced. The international community condemned the atrocities, and in 2009, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for President Bashir, accusing him of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. The fall of Omar al-Bashir and the Sudanese Revolution. After 3 decades of authoritarian rule, Omar al-Bashir's grip on power finally came to an end in 2019. The country had been facing severe economic challenges, including rising inflation and food shortages, sparking widespread protests. The Sudanese Revolution was driven by a diverse coalition of activists, students, professionals, and ordinary citizens, demanding an end to corruption, repression, and poverty. Despite a violent crackdown by security forces, the protests grew larger and more organized, culminating in a military coup that ousted Bashir in April 2019. Following Bashir's removal, Sudan entered a period of political transition, with a power-sharing agreement between the military and civilian leaders. The transitional government, led by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, promised to bring democracy, peace, and economic reform to Sudan. Sudan today, hope amidst challenges. Sudan today stands at a crossroads. After decades of conflict, repression, and division, the country is struggling to build a new future. The transitional government has made strides toward peace, including signing a historic peace deal with rebel groups in 2020, but much work remains to be done. Sudan's path toward peace has faced major setbacks since 2020. In October 2021, a military coup disrupted the fragile transitional government, plunging the country back into political turmoil. The coup triggered widespread protests, and tragically, many civilians lost their lives in the violent crackdowns that followed. Further complicating the situation, in 2023, intense fighting erupted between rival military factions, causing widespread devastation, displacing thousands, and leading to a humanitarian crisis. Despite international calls for peace, Sudan remains engulfed in conflict, with millions of civilians caught in the crossfire, struggling to survive amidst the ongoing violence. Sudan's challenges are immense. The country faces economic hardship, the scars of civil war, and deep-rooted political instability. Yet, there is hope. The resilience of the Sudanese people, their commitment to justice, and the international support for Sudan's democratic transition offer a glimmer of optimism. As Sudan continues its journey toward democracy and reconciliation, its people look to the future with cautious hope. The road may be long, but for the first time in decades, there is a chance for peace and prosperity. The story of Sudan is one of ancient civilizations, colonial exploitation, violent conflict, and ultimately, the enduring human spirit. From the Nubian kingdoms to the present-day revolutionaries, Sudan's people have faced extraordinary challenges and continue to fight for their future. This is not just the history of Sudan, it's the story of resilience, of a nation that refuses to be defined by its past, but rather looks toward a brighter future. This is Sudan, a land of great potential, still writing its story. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Sudan's history. If you found this story insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Veil of Time for more deep dives into the hidden stories of our world. Sudan's story is still unfolding. What do you think are the key lessons we can learn from its history? What part of Sudan's history stood out to you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's start a conversation about this remarkable nation. Your engagement helps keep these important stories alive, so let's keep the discussion going. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode.